Hello, good creatures, and welcome. My name is Petrina Calder, and I'm here with my friend Nate.
Hello, I'm Nate Boulding, and today on The Creatures We Become, we're going to be talking about The Power of Vulnerability by Brene Brown, a lecture series published as an audiobook that's all about what it means to show up, be fully seen, and live bravely, even when it's uncomfortable.
Dr. Brown's insights on shame, courage, connection, and vulnerability have inspired millions, and we wanted to unpack some of the ideas that stood out to us. As a therapist, I've spent a lot of time in conversations about the way that shame gets in the way of people living their best life.
As a coach, I've witnessed the consequences of what happens when people refuse to let go of their armor and not be their authentic selves, and how refusing to let go of old scripts about our lives can block us from evolving our mindset and therefore our lifestyle. And today we will share our personal takeaways from this book, the questions that came up, and even a few moments that challenged us.
So thank you for joining in to tackle the myths of vulnerability and the shame gremlins that get in the way. Now, let's discover who might be the creatures we become when we tap into
The power of vulnerability.
Thanks, Nate. So to open this book club discussion, I thought it would be good to just talk about what were some of our initial impressions about this book. What did you think of it? And if you had to explain what it's about to somebody in just like one or two sentences, how would you describe this book?
I think the book made a really big impact on me in a lot of aspects of my life. And I think generally it's a theme of how do we let go of the conditioning we faced that blocked us from being our true selves, and the things in the armor and such we have over our existence, and the things and stuff we want to do in life, and how we can be blocked by just the fears and the cultural or family conditioning, and how to, I'd say, peel through those layers and discover what barriers you faced and how you move forward and be your authentic self.
I agree. I think I was really surprised. I'm not sure that I knew what to expect with this book. I'd seen Dr. Brown talking on social media about her other books a number of times, and so knew that she was a big proponent of living authentically, and kind of she uses this quote from Theodore Roosevelt about the power of stepping into the arena, and maybe we'll talk about that quote a little bit later. But I think I wasn't necessarily prepared for the depth that this book went into in terms of, like you say, challenging some of those internalized beliefs that we sometimes carry that actually block us from being our most authentic selves. So I'm looking forward to getting into it with you. One of the central theses in the book that Dr. Brown talks about is that vulnerability is the center of every difficult emotion, but she's also found that it is the birthplace of every positive emotion that humans experience. So vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, empathy, creativity, innovation, accountability, and authenticity. And she found that people who then can really embrace vulnerability rather than avoiding it seem to be happier and more resilient than other people when it comes to facing life's trials. So I'm curious about, what does vulnerability mean to you? And has your understanding of vulnerability, has it changed as a result of reading this book?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think in some ways, like, there's a couple versions of myself that I think of when I was reading this book, and versions of me that were less in touch with myself, and versions of me that were more in touch with myself, and the things that happened through life that put me into positions that I wasn't in touch with myself per se. And I think now vulnerability was not seen as a weakness for me, that vulnerability was seen to me as being strong. And I think it came out as, in my leadership experience, that I had to be open with people to get people to open up to me. And that I'd already seen in the professional sense on how, if I was going to be vulnerable with people, they were more comfortable to be vulnerable back to me. But in another sense in my life, I think vulnerability would have been seen as weakness, and this more analytical destination, bodybuilding, education sort of version of myself would have seen vulnerability as a waste in some sense per se, that you didn't really need to open up to people other than your deep connected center. And I think now how this book really helped me conceptualize it was sort of showing up as yourself and it being courage despite your fear and uncertainty about being yourself in a certain sense. And that when you're your authentic self, you then open yourself up to the connections that that version of you needs, and the life that you can imagine is associated with happiness and joy and all these positive things, versus the unvulnerable self, never building any connections and never living a life that had deep joy and, I would say, deep meaning to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that that's one of the things that really came through loud and clear in this book, is about the importance of our own willingness to be vulnerable is how we build relationship and credibility with the people we want to be closest to. That it's almost like a prerequisite to expect others to be vulnerable with us. We need to be vulnerable ourselves, which is really interesting to me as a therapist, because I think it's one of the things that maybe differentiates my close personal friendships from my the working relationship I have with my clients as a therapist. Because in therapy, people come to therapy and they are quite vulnerable with their therapist, but there's not a reciprocal vulnerability on my part. And it has just made me all that much more mindful of just what a brave thing it is to be willing to open up and engage with a therapist. As a therapist, it has made me much more, I mean, I have always had a certain reverence for the courage that it takes to come into therapy, for the people who exhibit that courage. But I think this book just really hammered that home for me. I tend to think in metaphors. And when I think of vulnerability, the metaphor that comes to mind is, I think about like a dog or a cat being willing to lay on its back and show its belly to get affection, right? That's such a vulnerable position, but it is the posture that we need to take, is to give that trust to the people around us in order to receive that affection in return. Having said that, though, I think something you said about how your view of vulnerability has changed over time at different phases in your life, I think it leads us really nicely into one of the things I wanted to discuss, which is, she breaks down in this book this idea of there being myths about vulnerability. And I'll just list them briefly and then we can kind of go through them. So for the listeners at home, if you haven't had a chance to read this book yet, the 4 myths of vulnerability are: number 1, that vulnerability is weakness. Number 2 is that we can choose whether or not to be vulnerable. Number 3 is that you can do vulnerability alone, that you can be vulnerable all by yourself. And myth number 4 is that you can build trust with somebody without being vulnerable. So Nate, which of those myths did you resonate most with, and why?
I think for me, on a masculine sense in life, that vulnerability is a weakness, and that you see in some regards, for a man to be vulnerable is to be seen as weak. And in the myth of it, that being vulnerable would be associated to weakness, and that that then allows you to not necessarily have any value in the world. And I think it's an interesting perspective that vulnerability could possibly be weakness, because I think vulnerability is just something you're opening up to. It's like, say, there's vulnerable aspects to going into the gym and being unfamiliar with a certain training aspect, a new training modality, a new principle. There's vulnerability in connection, and there's vulnerability in loving somebody. You can't guarantee that somebody's going to love you back. And so it's like, this vulnerability is a weakness sense is an interesting dichotomy, because in a lot of ways it pinholes you into a point. Like, if you believe vulnerability is a weakness, then you're putting yourself in a place to associate the thing you need to do to really create a connection with somebody, people, whatever it is. you really have to be vulnerable to build any sort of connection with people. So you're pinholed, and if you believe vulnerability is a weakness, you're never going to open up yourself to vulnerability, and then you're never on a playing field going to ever really be able to be yourself, because the reality is that there's a lot of things that are uncertain in this world, and you can't view the thing we need to feel connection and really open ourselves up to people as a weakness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what's interesting about that too, because I hear that all the time about, the importance of men not being weak. And my husband will joke about like if he does something perceived as weak, that he'll lose his man card. And well, I think that that's like amusing when you're joking about it. Kind of the implication is that when you are vulnerable, it is weakness because you're essentially giving somebody the ability to hurt you, to use it against you. And it's a way of seeing the world that really perceives other people as like it's a dog-eat-dog world, like it's a jungle out there, and that people are just always going to be able to hurt one another. And I think that there are people out there who are like that, but that's not everybody. I think of these, the one that I have struggled with is myth number 3, which is she says it's a myth that you can do vulnerability alone. She says that being vulnerable inherently is about making yourself vulnerable with other people, that it is, and that you need support systems to be vulnerable. That is part of what makes it possible to be vulnerable, is that we feel supported and that we have people in our corner, so to speak. And I think where I ruffled with that one is that I think I have been somebody who can be a little on the hyper independent spectrum of things, and so have just always wanted to, like, no, I'll do it myself. Like I'll take care of it. That's fine. I don't need people. I want to have people in my life, but I don't need them. And I had to really sit with that as I was listening to this book, and recognize how that was even though I knew it was true that this was a myth, I think there's a part of me that still, because of my own trauma history and where that kind of hyper independence comes from, of kind of not wanting to have to depend on other people and wanting to just do it myself, I struggled with that one, even though I know it to be true.
Yeah, I think that if that I got played into that, I think it's interesting because there's a quote that I like. I can't remember exactly who said it, just stuck with my mind over time, is that you're trying to avoid the catastrophe that already happened. And that a lot of times, like, let's say talk about vulnerability on a development spectrum, like depending on age and family history, I think a lot of times because I also fall on that hyper independent side, is that we had to develop certain traits to deal with certain adversities, because as I think at a young age, conceptually, you can't conceive what's going on. So kids are really adaptive because they're just going to find the path of least resistance. And then so depending on certain things, for me anyway, I had to grow up a lot faster than what would be required normal, with my mom and dad struggling with mental illness and being moved in and out of psychiatric homes. I think there was a lot of points where I had to fend off for dinner. I had to take care of my younger brother. A lot of things where I had to be very, very independent. And I think that can sometimes create this sort of cool self of us as we're adapting, and we're trying to prevent that from happening and again, and avoid that vulnerability that we faced earlier. And then so we're trying to not build any connections because those connections could possibly cause chaos for ourselves. And it's like we're trying to unlive the catastrophe or rewrite the catastrophe from the beginning in being this hyper independent type. And then you don't want to show any vulnerability to anybody. And then so it's like the only person that knows your deepest self is you. And it's like nobody else needs to know that version of me. And I think that innately it pinholes you into a place of always wanting some connection, but never doing the things you need to do to create valuable connections.
Yeah, it kind of leads into myth number 4. Those two almost get connected. So myth number 4 is that you can build trust without vulnerability. I see that a ton in my own history. You've kind of alluded to that in your history too. It also shows up a ton in therapy when I'm working with people who are recovering from PTSD. One of the things that can happen is that folks who have experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, it shakes how they see the world, themselves, and other people related to a number of different themes. But one of those themes is around trust. And so it's that I have worked with people who have trauma histories who they want to have closeness in their relationships, they want to approach. But for them, that idea of letting down their guard, allowing themselves to be vulnerable, which is a necessary prerequisite to building trust with somebody, just feels so threatening that that it really becomes a block. And I can even see that like in small ways in my own life, like you said, that for those of us who are prone to that hyper independence, part of it is just because, it comes from a place of like needing to do things for ourselves a lot of the time, but then also maybe just not trusting that other people are going to follow through or be reliable or be dependable the way we need them to be. And so we're reluctant maybe to be vulnerable in a way that would allow us to build trust.
Yeah, I think it's like we can all imagine those people that we showed vulnerability to and they coveted it in a way. And those are the people that are the most sincere to us. It can be the smallest things. It can be that person that just asked, "How are you?" and actually was interested in your response versus seeking their own response to the question. Versus those deep things, like you have your best friend who you poured your whole self into, and that they were empathetic to you and helped you out of that hole you were in. And
Yeah.
it's funny because it's like that how could you possibly build trust for anybody if you didn't put them in a position to show you that they could be trusted? And I think that's where the myth 4 can really play in to be a pretty powerful obstacle for somebody. It's like, okay, that you're trying to do vulnerability alone, like that doesn't even make sense. And that you're trying to build trust with people and then never exposing them to something that would allow you to trust them. And then it's almost this sort of, you're putting yourself on guard. And okay, maybe there was somebody at some point that hurt you, but there was also somebody out there who didn't. And
Yeah.
you could conceptualize two endings. And at one point, having a big community of people you trusted that were tried and true, and being alone. And it's like the alone, it just doesn't, it doesn't really I just don't think in a lot of ways humans can be alone. Like we're pack creatures, but our intelligence was developed and our brain folds expanded because we had to learn how to really create complicated communication with each other in deep interpersonal dynamics. It's like we cannot be alone. Alone is insanity. And
Yeah.
so if we need to be vulnerable to people, and you got to expose people to things that you can actually build trust with them by exposing some vulnerability. That doesn't mean you just pour your heart out to everybody, but you got to give some people some small things that you can build trust for.
Yeah. I like in the book, she used that analogy with her daughter about, she called them her marble jar friends, about like that it's like we each have a jar inside us, and that every time somebody does something that they do what they say they're going to do, or they are reliable, or they check in on us, it puts marbles in the jar. And the more marbles there are in the jar, the more trust has been built over time in that friendship. And that it is this gradual thing that occurs, not an all at once thing.
Yeah.
So in terms of then kind of what is the value of vulnerability, she talks about that it makes possible all of these wonderful things, that we inherently need to be vulnerable in order to access things like authenticity and joy and belonging, and love. And so she started looking at then the people who she described as wholehearted. So wholehearted people are the people who really seem to embrace vulnerability, are much more willing to be vulnerable in their lives than people who are not willing to be vulnerable and are a little bit more guarded around that. And she looked to try and find what are the differences between these two groups. And she found that the only thing that really distinguished them, it wasn't about how affluent they were, what their cultural backgrounds were, or anything like that. It was about whether or not the person fundamentally believed that they were worthy of love and belonging, and that the people who were willing to be vulnerable thought that they were fundamentally worthy of love and belonging, and the people who were more guarded had more shaky relationships with their belief in their worth of love and belonging. So from there, it kind of takes us to a couple of questions. One is that then, what are the things that block us from feeling love and that we are worthy of love and belonging? And then how do we embrace vulnerability? Like, what does that actually look like in practice? So this is where we got thrown in the deep end. And I am so grateful to you, Nate, for being willing to go on this journey with me, because I think I didn't realize when we were getting into this book that the thing that blocks us from being able to access a sense of our worthiness of love and belonging is shame. And there's a whole bunch of talk in this book that is all about unpacking shame. And as a therapist, shame is like the hardest of the emotions to work with. And I'm a therapist who works with emotions. Shame is a really tough one. So I wanted to just start by saying thank you for being willing.
You're welcome.
And like, how did that go? How did that go for you? Just to start.
Yeah, so it's funny, like I would say nothing short of earth-shattering. in There's a couple of things that go on there. I think I would start with the sort of concept of the wholehearted living and then move into the shame stuff. But it's funny, kind of a little bit of context is sort of that I think in a lot of ways I've been on this sort of journey to wholehearted living for the last maybe 4 years, a while, basically since my mom died. And I didn't really realize it, but I had been working towards, like, you don't always know how to build muscle when you first start training. And you could hire a coach and that stuff, but that type of information or type of resources weren't available for me when I started training. So I think one of the foundations to me being such a competent person to lead people with training is that I might as well have been on an island with no information, and I just had to sort of go and try to figure it out. And so there's this decade plus 15, 16 years of training that has just been tried and true with many experiments and then developed on context. But I think for me, I blasted into this concept of wholehearted living about 4 years ago when my mom died. And I think it's important to understand how emotions work, is that if we're the beach, and I always like this example, like if we're the beach and the oceans or the emotions are the waves, is you can't just dull like one emotion. Like if you're going through grief, you can't just shut down grief to do what you need to do. If you shut down grief, you're shutting down everything. What you're doing is you're putting this sense of your emotional capacity and you're packing it into a ball. And it can be quite important sometimes. It's a valuable skill to be able to compartmentalize certain things that could affect how we do our day-to-day stuff. But for me, in the context is when my dad died, I got really, really locked into this endeavor, like this. I was going to change my whole life, and I was going to do it by 1 + 1 = 2, and I was going to become the smartest person and a pro bodybuilder. It's like that this value, my self-worth, then got attached to how muscular I could get and how intelligent I could get, and nothing else mattered. And it was this quest to be the biggest, most jacked, most intelligent, analytical coach that could just be the best coach, but also was the most jacked. And so my self-worth was really wrapped up into this idea of how jacked I was and how intelligent I was. And there's other contexts to that go deeper, but first, and then when I went on this quest for 4 years, and then I lost my mom. And what had happened is, in the aspects of how I lost my mom, I totally collapsed because all those emotions that had been put into this box just blasted open, and I didn't know how to deal with any of it. And there was a lot of context into how I got through that, but in a lot of ways, I realized what I'd locked down, and what I had locked down was myself. And I then had to try to figure out who I was and what I was outside of being super muscular and intelligent. And that was a long journey. And I've been on that for, let's say 4 years, and been really moving towards this concept of wholehearted living, but not really having a name to it per se.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it was huge because it just opened the box. And it's like, I always like the analogy of a veil. Like when we don't exactly know how we're feeling, but we start to get closer to it, if there's not a block on it, it's like a veil. You can kind of see through it. You're like, this is
Yeah.
kind of how I feel, but I don't really, there's shapes over there. And then this was one of those moments where it's just ripped the whole veil on. And it was like, what the hell is all this?
Yeah.
And I think for me, what blocks us from feeling worthy of love and belonging, I think there was two things for me. Is that I was told that I was dyslexic, and I was always going to be sort of dumb in a sense and never could be intelligent. And then there was some, I think, shameful experiences when I was younger about my intelligence and about my appearance. And there's this one experience, and I actually just thought of it because it kind of plays into the continuum of shame versus guilt, but
Okay.
humiliation versus embarrassment. And we'll get into that, but this scenario is funny because what had happened when I was, it probably would have been when I was in grade 4, grade 3 or 4. What
Okay.
happened is my elementary school, in the gym, there was the men's changing room opened up, and it opened up right into the change room. But there
Okay.
was a sort of a row of lockers that say didn't go to the back end. Like there wasn't an opening and then a curve to the wall and then the change room. Just opened up right to the change room. And then what had happened is when I was younger, I was kind of the weird kid from an emotionally tarnished family, and a lot of people knew it. I always had long hair, ripped clothes. I had lice more than everybody else, and I think there was some shame that I experienced along that context. But this specific scenario, what had happened is there was a girl I had a crush on, and I was changing in this change room, and then somebody thought it'd be funny to kick the door open because they saw me changing in this front little bit, and the door opened, and I had this vision in my mind of this girl I had a crush on and all the popular girls, and they're all laughing at me. And then the sort of like I'm freaking naked, and the door just closes slowly to a bunch of people laughing. And I think this is one specific scenario, but I think it's like little me being shamed and humiliated for whatever sense of what the intention of that thing was. But
Yeah.
then, okay, you wonder why I had some sort of the my self-worth got attached to how muscular I could be, but also how not skinny I could be, because I was kind of the tall, skinny guy. And I think that it's really interesting because, say, over this timeline, I would never feel like I belonged or loved or self-worth. All that wouldn't mean anything to me if I wasn't massive, because I didn't have any self-worth if I wasn't jacked. And then, well, when my mom died, I realized the cost of that journey in blocking my whole self down. And I started to unpack stuff like this, that maybe it was never about how muscular I was, but it was me looking for some self-worth through getting muscular and then attaching my self-worth to
To
being
it.
muscular. Yeah. And it really played in a huge sense when I started to go on this wholehearted living journey, because that was an obstacle like that. Like I don't feel any love or belonging if I'm not freaking massive. And I had to go through this experience of sort of moving away from bodybuilding and inherently getting not as jacked. And it was actually a very hard obstacle for me because I started to, as I got less jacked, self-worth out the window.
Mm.
And I had to start to find that intrinsic belief in self, in a self-worth that exists outside of, say, just being muscular. Now, that's a huge context, but I had gone on this journey of wholehearted living a long time ago. And then this book just put a name on it and sort of a destination. I
Right.
realized kind of how much work I'd gotten, or how much work I had done to live wholeheartedly. And this started to open up a door for me to get the rest of the way. And I think it's been nothing short of earth-shattering in a way to be able to see it so clearly and then see reaping rewards from it in already such a short time period.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm so grateful that that's the place that you were in when we jumped into this book, because I think I've described it as jumping into the deep end. And it really, even for me, it felt that way. I think maybe because I wasn't expecting it. And I don't want that to deter anybody from reading this book. I think absolutely we'll talk about who we think this book will be good for. And I think there's lots of people. Dr. Brown really does a great job of kind of baby stepping you into it in a way that keeps the feelings of shame manageable. But she really also unpacks it in a way that gets you to look at it in a way that helps you better name it, describe it, be familiar with all its trappings, right? And even for me as a therapist, I've done my own work on my own shame. I've worked with lots of other people on their feelings of shame. And even as I was going through this, it was like, oh, there's more layers. There's more layers. But that's a good thing, I think.
Definitely.
I think one of the things that you have already touched on, so I'll just kind of elaborate a little bit and then we can talk about it, is that she distinguishes shame from other emotions that are kind of similar and adjacent to shame. So shame versus guilt, and then she talks about humiliation and embarrassment. Humiliation and embarrassment are kind of less challenging or less problematic, so I'll describe them first. Embarrassment is when there is a mild sense of shame, but you forgive yourself for it because you know that the thing that you have done or are is a very human thing. Other humans have been embarrassed in the same way that you have. This is a human foible. And so if it's like, I'm feeling ashamed, but it's also, I know I'm in good company. So we can laugh about it a little bit. Maybe not in the heat of the moment when the door flies open and we're standing there in the locker room. But in hindsight, you can look back and with humility and know that, like, yeah, lots of young men have had the same embarrassment, right? Humiliation was an interesting one in terms of how she described it, and I liked her way of describing. It's the sense of like that somebody has shamed or embarrassed us, and so there's that feeling of shame or embarrassment, but that there's also a flavor of, but we didn't deserve it. We didn't deserve to be humiliated. Either that we're being, that people are looking at us as though we should feel ashamed, but it's not something we should be ashamed about, like that we've got, like it's damage to our reputation that was undeserved or something like that, or that humiliation can come from that betrayal of like that I had entrusted something embarrassing to you and you betrayed my privacy. And so I'm ashamed, but I'm also mad about it. So that's humiliation. I think the more important distinguishing ones is between shame and guilt. When people come to me in therapy, that's a big one that I'm always trying to work on, because in the type of therapy I do, every emotion has a reason that it's come. It has like a kind of common things that will trigger it. And they also are motivating us to do something. There's an action urge that comes associated with each of them. And shame, the action urge associated with shame is to hide, is to conceal ourselves, that there's something shameful and so we should hide it. Versus guilt is the emotion of not that I am a bad thing, but that I've done a bad thing. I've taken an action that's hurt somebody, it's wounded a relationship, or had a consequence that I didn't want. And now that I appreciate the consequence, the action urge is I feel guilty. I want to repair it. So I want to repair the relationship, or I want to change my behavior so I don't make those kinds of mistakes again. And so that difference between I did a bad thing versus I am a bad thing, and the action urge to repair versus to hide, is a really important one in therapy, because shame tends to shut people down, whereas guilt can actually be super productive in terms of moving people forward. What did you think when she kind of elaborated on those differences? How did that hit for you?
Yeah, I think it was actually it's like kind of the same thing, ripping the veil away. I'd never even thought of shame. I wouldn't even necessarily know I knew what the word meant. Like it's like but you can remember a time that you felt shame. But I never had sort of this understanding of shame, and I think it was really, really valuable because I really liked the example of that shame is I am the problem, and guilt is I made a mistake. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this inherent belief that you can solve a mistake or a problem, but you can't solve yourself. Like it's like if you're the problem and you're associating yourself with the problem, it's not productive. And what I liked the analogy, and it really made me think, and I try to say it right, is that for drug addiction, shame is like salt water to somebody. uh what's the word I'm looking, not dehydrated, but like the extreme end of dehydration. um what's the word
Yeah,
I'm
so
looking for?
it's like it is dehydration. Like if you're thirsty, if you were stuck out at sea in a boat and you were
That's what it
surrounded by
is.
nothing but
Man at sea.
seawater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like shame is like salt water to someone stuck at sea. And I really like that example because my personal experiences with shame were actually quite a bit bigger than I thought.
Mm,
And I had a lot of, I think, tarnishes on my self-worth in relation to shame that I was experiencing. Um, and I think that's where it's like unpacking how deep we want to go on this thing, because this book was actually like wild for me, because it made me realize what things were shame and what things were guilt. Like, and I liked the humiliation versus embarrassment thing. It's like embarrassment is okay, something embarrassing happened, but it was kind of funny. Like you can identify with people. When humiliation is like, I was humiliated,
yeah.
and whether it was intentional, unintentional, whatever, it's kind of the same thing. It's like something horrible happened to me. There's okay, so kind of I slipped and everybody laughed. It was funny, and then that there's this individual experience on what humiliation and shame is. Like for me in that analogy, a popular kid who was friends with the girls, maybe a bit older, who was muscular, I don't know, whatever. Door
Yeah.
opens and it's funny. Like he's freaking jacked, whatever. It's like what he's the popular guy. Okay, a little bit of embarrassment, but maybe it's fun. He's friends with the guys who kicked the door open. It could not be as humiliating. But for me, somebody with very low self-worth, that was
Yeah.
humiliation. And it stuck so well with me over time. When I thought of humiliation, boom, that that whole scenario popped in my mind so fast.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. But say for me, understanding the difference between shame and guilt allowed me to actually start to rebuild my self-worth in the areas that I felt shame in. And without that understanding, it's kind of like you're just the problem and there's no solution, and you're bad. You're bad, and that's it.
Exactly. And that's the thing. When the conclusion is I'm bad, then there's nothing to do but hide, right? And so I think the more we can really, this is the value to me as a therapist not just as a therapist, honestly, like as a woman, as a friend, the value in us being willing to really look at our shame is that then we can start to question it, especially a lot of that stuff that came up when we were kids, right? Is like does it serve me to continue seeing things in the way I have been seeing them? Does it serve me to continue seeing myself as bad? Or is that a story I'm telling myself that's actually holding me back? And I think, like, I'm going to call back to something we talked about in the last episode, where I had kind of shared that for me, growing up, I had internalized these ideas that, about martyring yourself for a bigger cause. And that what that meant is that, like, you should make yourself smaller, be quieter, have fewer needs, be, less loud or provocative or whatever. And that I really internalized that message. And where that led to a lot of shame for me is that, like, I was never good at it. Like, I'm sure some people who know me may have listened to that previous episode and went like, that bitch has never been small a day in her life. She is the loudest, mouthiest person I know. Like, so what does she mean she internalized that message? And it's what I internalized is that that's how I was supposed to be. And that I was not capable of it, that I was bad because I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to make myself small and quiet and that kind of thing. And it's, that when we internalize those messages about ourselves, about all the ways that we are wrong in some way, it changes how we engage with the world, and that we do need to really question and unpack some of those things. So that leads into kind of the next topic here related to shame, which is that she labeled these as the shame gremlins. So, like, I have a shame gremlin around being, like, too loud, too much. She talks about the two main themes, although they're not the only gremlins, is themes around being too much of something or not enough of something. So I have a shame gremlins around being too much. It sounds like in terms of that muscularity, you had internalized a shame gremlin around not being enough, not being muscular enough, strong enough, big enough. And so I was going to ask then, like, what are your experience been with the gremlins? Like, is that a helpful framing of it? Gremlins, it's from 1980s movie reference of a movie that I have loved growing up, but I don't know, like, do you even know what a gremlin is, Nate?
I love the gremlins.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's funny because let's see, it's like exactly what you need, because it's almost like in a lot of ways you can see this foundation of a shame-based society. Like, it's very clear that shame isn't a good way to change behavior. That when you shame people, they tend to like, their self-worth, they're bad. So why would they do anything else? Like, this is them. I'm bad and I've been shamed for it. And I think it's really interesting how much shame actually plays into our society. And when you view shame as shame and it's a gremlin, you can kind of see it everywhere, and then it starts to lose its power, because shame is only powerful in isolation. And when you can name it like that, and then you have some connections with some people that understand, you don't necessarily have to have experienced your shame, but have empathy with you and can help you through it. I think just having this sort of funny name to it, the gremlins, makes a lot of sense, because in a lot of senses, it's like we're just humans. Like, so shame only comes from a cultural context and a social norm, but it's kind of it all should be guilt. Like, nobody's inherently wrong, despite some very extreme circumstances, maybe on some spectrums of some human beings, like, but they don't feel shame. Like, so it's like in a lot of senses, that shame is kind of silly, but we don't experience it silly. Like, shame, I liked how she asked people to describe what shame felt like, and it lines up with sort of trauma symptoms. And so it's really interesting that everybody can feel shame, but not everybody's looking at it like a gremlin. It's like they're just experiencing this thing, and they don't want anybody to know about this given thing. And it's not necessarily everybody should know about your shame. It should be a select group that helps you with the shame. But I think having this term like the shame gremlin allows you to identify it right away, and then you can kind of see it. And when you put the light on the gremlin, it's not so scary. And I think that for me, it's really interesting because it can play out in a lot of contexts. Like for me, it's funny because I am now a real confident person, but that bodybuilding version of me wasn't. I was
Hmm.
confident when it's freaking huge and all pumped up, but a lot of people might see that as confident. But that's basically the version of me that is needing some sort of external validation to feel whole or to feel confident. But then now this version of me has a lot of belief in himself and self-worth that is outside any external circumstances. It's internal belief in myself. It's a belief in my value and everything and my capabilities. And but it might sound funny is like if I saw a bodybuilding version of me, if I saw a picture and my lower arm looked long, I might have a meltdown. And there was this like,
Interesting.
I had this shame about how long my arm was. And
Hmm.
I can't necessarily fully point it out. I think it was like, it's a very visual representation of I'm skinny, like you were skinny. And I had this, and I joke, it's funny, I've joked about this with some close personal people in my life over time, is the pencil analogy. Is the version of me that was smaller, I just kind of felt like a pencil. Like I just felt narrow. And I had shame about how narrow I looked. Like if I saw a picture and I looked narrow, like I was not happy. And I
Yeah.
can very apologize to my partner at the time. The There was this time where she took a picture of me and she showed it to me, and I had like a full-on trauma response. Might as well. I was sweating. I was upset. I was like really upset. Like, do I actually look like that? And at the time, I didn't have any understanding of this. But when I look back to it, it's so obvious. It's like that's a shame gremlin right there. You're skinny, like you're narrow. You're the skinny kid, and because you're skinny, you don't have any value in the world, and you're bad. You're skinny. But that sounds like you wouldn't think of that of probably me ever. Like maybe when I was quite a bit younger, but I started getting into weight training when I was about I was 13, and I took it very seriously very early. So I would have made some say progress, but like at this point, like some of these times where I'd feel narrow, I'm like a 250 pound man. 250 pound, and that's not like that wasn't a fat guy.
Not
That was like
narrow.
I was a big person. Oh, and if I saw a picture, but so I like this analogy. Long story short, of the gremlins, because it's like if you have somebody you can tell that to, or even you can see it yourself. That's the shame gremlin. I'm not skinny, and my worth isn't attached to how big I am. That's fine.
Yeah. And it's funny about how the gremlins, what I like about using that analogy too of it being like this little monster is that it happens so quickly. We have such a visceral response to it. Like our bodies react when we have those thoughts come on board. And yet they're completely unreasonable. Like you can say, like, I have a shame gremlin around like this idea of thinness or narrowness or skinniness. And it's like other people would look at those same photos and wish they had your physique at the time, but you were seeing it through a different lens. And the gremlins are so confident that they are right. And I think that's one of the nature of them. That's why I like kind of seeing them as these like nasty little creatures who are so certain of their correctness. And yet they are often like comical in just how inaccurate they are in terms of how they see things. Right. So I found that helpful too. I think underneath it, exploring what are the shame-based fears that are underlying that, like that it's not just about, say, a gremlin that says you're too loud or too bossy or you're too skinny, right? It's what does it mean to be too loud? What does it mean to be too skinny,
Mm-hmm.
right? That there's some fears around that. And I think that's what I've been unpacking a lot through this, is that I found like I have been pretty easily able to identify where there are some gremlins that are still hanging around in my own life. Because some of it is work I've done in the past and worked through. But some of it is still happening even today. Like I have confided in you, Nate, that like some of it I have been continuing to unpack as I have moved forward with my fitness journey. Like part of it
Mm.
is like I'm just going to be vulnerable right here, right now, because I know you are a safe place for me to do this. And I think like it's on the spectrum of vulnerability. It's I feel safe with this one. Is that like I had a lot of stuff come up when it came to how I show up in the gym. Just the idea of taking up space, that I, as a middle-aged woman, have the audacity to show up and use the deadlift platform to lift you're not even lifting 200 pounds. Who do you think you are? Or like when I first started doing remote coaching with you and I had to like video record myself, it was like, what a narcissist this 50 something year old woman is to be recording herself. Like, who does she think she is? Or getting out the equipment, like dragging over the air bike into the AstroTurf area where there's other people also trying to work out and claiming space there so I can do my sled pushes. And then like pushing myself, like, because your workouts are not like, I don't come in and like faff about for a half an hour and then go home. It
No.
is like I'm there for an hour and a half and I am like red-faced and sweating and making the grunting noises and like pushing myself. And I sometimes like I think to myself, like, other people surely are looking at this, are looking at me, and what I imagine they say is like, who the fuck does this old broad think she is, huffing and puffing? She's going to give herself a stroke. Like, who is she to do this? And I wrestle with that every time I go to the gym. It is getting easier as I have gotten more comfortable in the spaces where I work out, and going at the same time, you see the same people. So I'm sure they've started getting used to me of just like, oh yeah, that's Petrina. She huffs and puffs, and that's just what she does. But at first it was really, really hard. And I still to this day struggle with it a little bit, because it's this idea of like, there's the gremlin that is saying like, who do you think you are? You're inconveniencing people. Like what must this say about you as an egomaniac or as a deluded person that you're doing all this stuff?
Yeah, it's funny because it's like on that same sense of things, it's like there's some stuff for me that is similar on that spectrum of the gym stuff. That's so contrast to how I am now, where I now train for performance metrics and aesthetics. Those things are byproducts. Like there's factored in things, but it's like, okay, more muscle to be more jacked versus more muscle to have stronger joints and better force output and have a longer wealth of life in relation to lean body mass over age. I guess that's a whole different game. But for me, when it was just the aesthetic endeavor, and I really just don't believe people should be training for just aesthetics. I don't think it's good for humans. I think it puts us in a bad headspace and can lead us down narcissistic viewpoints. I can say that pretty confidently. Now, my stuff isn't going to be everybody's stuff, but when we train for just aesthetics, we are putting the sole point of reference in relation to how we appear. And so that means that it's subjective in a way. Say our arm could be bigger, but we're always going to be in a point of comparison, and comparison is the thief of joy. Now, some people who are really, really analytic can make it through this without having too many consequences, because they're not putting their self-worth with how muscular and massive they are. And some people can do that, but I'd say most people can't, because then their self-worth gets attached into how big they are, how lean they are at a given point in time. And if they're not that lean or that big, always they're nothing. And for me, when I was training for bodybuilding, it would get that way. Sometimes, like, say if I was, for me, a big struggle was going away from bodybuilding, and specifically performance enhanced bodybuilding. Oh, because now it's like, oh, I'm dropping weight fast, I'm losing muscle mass fast, and maybe from an outside perspective, I still looked good, but I'm melting inside. Like, I'm like, oh, I was this thing, and now I'm losing everything, and there's no matter how possibly hard I could train, I can't be that thing anymore. And so some
Yeah.
shame started to pop into this differentiation between those two versions of myself. This is the skinnier version, and this is the jacked version of myself that felt awesome because I was jacked. And so there was shame in like somebody saying, "Oh, you're looking a bit skinny." Like, oh, oh, that would be like, that's earth shattering. Like, I'm gonna go home and cry myself to sleep now. But so it's funny because I had shame about how I'd look on a given day. Like, oh, I don't deserve to wear this clothes that I used to wear. And I started wearing really baggy stuff all the time, and I'm not wanting to show my appearance in the gym. And because it was like I felt shame about the way I looked in comparison to how I used to look. And then my value was attached to that performance enhanced bodybuilding version of myself. And then say in comparison to now, is now my metrics and all my training is related to certain performance things, and then how I look is a byproduct. But then what I found is I was able to be in a lot of ways just as jacked as I've ever been, have better cardiovascular performance and better strength metrics than I ever have, but my self-worth is not on the table anymore. When I'm training, I'm
Yeah.
training. It just doesn't matter. I basically wear the same, I'd wear a tight Under Armour shirt and some short shorts with a hat. That's that's always. And I used to literally wear different clothes for different days. Like, okay, this shirt, this is for arm day. These are for leg day, like these different things. And if I was wearing clothes that wasn't my standard outfit for that given day, sometimes I wouldn't even feel like working out. Like I wouldn't feel good. When now there's no attachment to self-worth. I'm training. And so now this is the version of me that's actually intrinsically confident. And because I'm devoid of just a sole aesthetic endeavored approach to training. And I think a lot of people fall victim of that when that they're just training for this one aesthetic. And but the reality is sometimes you can't exactly get to that point you want. Like sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. And it's like, say on a male, like you're comparing yourself to Chris Bumstead, you're never going to be enough. Like you're
Never.
never enough. Versus if you're training for these performance metrics and you're getting stronger and you're getting more muscular, and let's say you can get a better 5-minute row test or whatever it is, and you're seeing metrics get better, you're compounding interest on you being successful over time, and you're building intrinsic confidence based on just self, like how much better you got. And then now you are your competitor. That's a confident version of you. One that's comparing themselves to everybody and all these things we see on social media. That's the death of intrinsic confidence.
Yeah. And it's funny how, depending on what we're focused on at the time, it can bring out those gremlins more or less, kind of depending on where our priorities are. I think that might lead us into kind of the next kind of topic in this, which is that she talks about that with shame, that there's some really common, she calls it shame-based armor that we wear. So it is armor that we put on to try and guard ourselves against feeling shame. And there's a whole bunch of them, but there's a top 3 that she says are kind of ubiquitous. Everybody experiences these. And so the 3 are foreboding-joy, perfectionism, and numbing. And I wonder if perfectionism in particular seems like it's part of what might feed into that aesthetic endeavor, that when people are really focused on the aesthetics and trying to perfect the aesthetic of something, that it is, that is somehow trying to armor them against feeling shame if they're not perfect. And yet the kind of nature of all of these different armor types is that they actually just kind of exacerbate the shame.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about this was something that connects to this that she said very early on, that when she first said it, I was almost annoyed, because I was like, what do you mean? Because in a lot of ways we have everything now, and it's like food's taken care of. The chances of you dying every day is quite slim. And it's like, so a lot of things are taken care of. So day to day isn't this quest for survival anymore. Um, there's in some ways much bigger problems, but in some ways much smaller problems. So a lot of them are conceived issues, and they're real, but it's a different type of issue. But so the beginning of the book, she talked about us living in a scarcity society, and that like it like contradicted how I see the world. But then as she got into it, I was like, oh my god, this is crazy, because then it's true, because we're in the constantly not enough society, because there's comparison in everything. And depending on how deep you want to go on some like sociological perspectives, like what of society, and going into like to say this capitalistic nature of things in Western society, whatever it is. But specifically, it really made me think of just sort of health, fitness, people's belief in themselves. It's like social media is a monster, because we can just compare ourselves instantaneously to the best in the world or the top 0.2% of anything,
Yeah.
anything at all. And so we're constantly posed this not enough. And I think it's very interesting, because then it plays out into a lot of different things with armor against shame, because like it just depends on what you're feeling shame for on like a fitness and self worth perspective. But then we're almost put into this point where there's more comparison than there's ever been, and then the gaps are fully apparent. And then so now it's like this: if you're not doing that, it's all or nothing. And I see this a lot of times in my profession as a fitness manager at Good Life. Is I get the very unique perspective of seeing people at the start of their journey, these new people come into the gym. And it's a crazy stat that I see month in and month out, that 80% of people who start a new membership end up not coming in a let's say 10 times in 1 month in their first 6 weeks. 80% of people. And that 80% of people are then going to cancel their gym membership the next month, or they're not going to show up consistently. That's crazy. That's nuts. That means that 80% of people who are just going to start on this fitness and journey, or this journey to development of self, are going to fail. That's
Yeah.
crazy. And I think it really plays into some of this stuff, is because we can just immediately compare ourselves to the best, see the gap, and now it's all or nothing. If I'm not running a 100-mile race with broken feet, I might as well not run. Instead of just like, okay, I want to get fitter, and maybe I could just run 2 times a week, and I could just run 500 meters. And then the next week I'll build up on that. And there's this all or nothing perspective. And I think it really plays into some of this stuff, where we're comparing ourselves to so much, and there's so much going on, and that then we have to resort to certain things to protect ourselves from shame and of not being enough. And I think the one thing that I would go into that for me is the foreboding-joy. I think that's something for me that was quite significant, and I had never had that. This was one of those earth-shattering things that I started looking back and I said, oh my God, because I think in a lot of times in my life, it was the worst outcome. Like it was, okay, all right, my dad lost his job. Okay, a little bit of context,
Okay.
because I like the stories. For the first time in my life, when I was at about my second year of college,
Okay.
both my parents had a job and they were kind of doing okay. That's earth shattering to me. It was crazy. I had never felt that before. Wasn't long with that my dad lost his job, and then he started losing his voice. Like and that was weird. And it wasn't like a cold. All of a sudden he stopped being able to talk. That's a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Find out that that's ALS manifesting in his throat,
Ooh.
and he was dead in 2 years.
Wow.
And that's like from a big 6'6", 250-pound man. My dad was always a big guy who was in relatively good shape. And that was not the only time I've had the worst case play out. And so, me as a person, anything could be a catastrophe. That's just how I see things. It's just like, it's always the worst case. And it's like, I'm always trying to get ahead of it. And so I think one of the things that happens is a lot of times, like, I've struggled in my life to feel any joy because I already wreck it in my mind. It's like I'm already like, how could this end? How could I prepare for it? How could I get on top of it? I liked what she brought up. Kind of our society now, and has anybody watched the news or seen a violent image on social media, whatever,
Yeah.
because that's rampant right now. But for me, it was actually, there was these points where I was actually having worst case scenarios happen in my personal life. And so sometimes I can catastrophize things very, very quickly. And then I'll start to like dim down the lever of something good, or outright maybe destroy it, because it could possibly end already in a lot of different things in my life. And I think looking at it then helped me start to see the behavior. And I liked how she talked about the antidote for joy foreboding was gratefulness.
Yeah.
And that she couldn't imagine how it could be that simple, because everybody's kind of heard of it. Oh, be more grateful and you're going to feel better. And then that there was actually this sort of one-in-one difference with people who actually did a daily gratefulness practice versus people that didn't. And so that's something that I've started on, is trying to implement a daily gratefulness practice and not ruin good things before they have a chance to get ruined. And the joy foreboding really stuck out for me in my personal life, and it's something I really struggled with, that I didn't quite have a name for it. And I think what was really valuable here for me was putting a name to it. Like, oh, that thing's nasty. I got to stop doing it. And I should be more grateful all the time. So I start to enjoy the little things and not ruin things before they could be ruined by something else, and therefore get outside of my control.
Yeah, I'm also glad to have a name for it. It's not something that I was necessarily prone to myself, but I have seen it lots in some of my partners. And as somebody who doesn't live in that place, it was always just really frustrating. It's like having somebody who just like, you're feeling excited or enthusiastic about something, and it'd be like somebody throwing a wet blanket on it or trying to like rain on your parade. And it's like, but understanding it from a place of it being a shame guardian, right? That it's really just trying to protect you from being caught off guard or caught from being surprised, but it really does then suppress enthusiasm and joy at times. Yeah, and that's a tough thing. I think I've learned a lot more about the gratitude practices. In my work, I've been working on a quality improvement project looking at workplace wellness, and gratitude is one of the practices that there's fantastic research evidence for just how protective a gratitude practice can be, not just for, say, foreboding joy, but also in terms of countering that perception that the world is a terrible place, that terrible things happen every single day, and that we need to take care of our own because like nobody's giving anybody any handouts, right? That's kind of the attitude of it. And sometimes with my previous partners who were prone to this foreboding joy, they would just say, well, Petrina, you're just naive. I'm just more of a realist. And I'm like, you're not a realist. This is just like you're not able to be present and just enjoy the moment, in my mind.
And nihilistic.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so lots of great research around gratitude. And I really like that she emphasized too that gratitude, because some people will tritely say like, oh, I've got an attitude of gratitude. And she was like, it is not about your attitude. Like, and I love the analogy she said. She's like, I've got all kinds of yoga pants. I live in yoga pants. I've got yoga shoes. I think in my closet, I've got 2 different yoga mats. She's like, I've got a yoga attitude. I do not practice yoga. And it's the same with gratitude, that you can have an attitude of gratitude, and that is not the same thing as having a concrete practice of gratitude. And the research shows that too. And it doesn't need to be a complicated practice. There's lots of simple ways to practice gratitude. But placing emphasis on our gratefulness for things with intention is a huge thing. I think with all of these, the foreboding joy, the perfectionism, and the numbing, I see all of them as being things that really block us from being able to experience those positive emotions and those joy, right? Like foreboding joy makes it so that like, even if I'm happy right now, I see it as highly temporary and I'm immediately suspicious of what's going to make it go away, right? With perfectionism, it's like, I can't enjoy the satisfaction of like achieving a PR for myself because I am immediately comparing my PR to what I think I should be doing or what actually strong people do. And because mine isn't as strong as theirs, then I can't just enjoy my own success, right? And numbing too. I liked your analogy before about kind of putting your emotions in a box. And if you're trying to stuff one emotion in the box, they all go in the box, right? It's the same with numbing. Working with folks who struggle with addiction, often people are looking to numb some of their feelings, but the problem is that it doesn't just numb one of them, it numbs all of them, including joy.
Yeah, I liked one of the things she talked about in like antithesis to joy foreboding, and that this, when you looked at people who had really extreme outcomes, like losing a child or losing a partner, that a lot of time, or the like in the context of when the disaster actually happened, when you talk to these people, they all miss these little things. Like it's not these big things that happen, it's these little things in between about people. And I liked one of the analogies she brought up was that talk to I think it's good context to understand she does qualitative research,
Yeah.
and qualitative research is told stories.
Yes.
And I really like qualitative research because you get way more context than anything else. And you don't get one and two, you just get these things that are very applicable in the human experience that are outside statistics per se.
Yeah.
And she interviewed somebody who had lost their wife, and he said he would have killed to have been upstairs and heard her barking off about how he bought the wrong bread at the store.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because when you forebode joy, you don't stop the catastrophe from happening. What you do is you miss the beautiful moment that it was in catastrophization of what could have happened. And then when something does happen, like, you trying to avoid it earlier didn't help you at all when it happened. All you do is you just miss these little things in life that are really, really something that gives you joy.
Yeah.
And instead you're just sort of ruining things, and that doesn't help you in the future if something negative happens. And as you can see, the foreboding joy one really stuck out to me because I think it was something that's really played into a lack of joy in my life over a long time, and I didn't even realize it, and was something I was learning on the quest to live wholeheartedly before I had a name to it. But pointing it out was like the same thing with the shame. It allowed me to just like attack it. Like, how do I kill that thing? Because that thing sucks and it's ruining my life.
Yeah. Yeah. We humans will go to extreme extents to not feel the shame and the gremlins. I think the one I'll elaborate a little bit more on is numbing, because I think that that's one that I have employed a lot in my life, and that I see it happen. I mean, humans do this a lot, even if it's not one that you necessarily relate to, because numbing can show up in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it is about like the things we do, like we shove the feelings in the box and compartmentalize it, but then what do we do to distract ourselves from the fact that there's a box that is screeching to be opened, right? And so people can do that with drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, food, video games. And I think for myself in particular, and so scrolling on social media. So social media has this double whammy of it gives you lots of exposure to perfected and cultivated images, because they're also not an accurate reflection of the influencer's reality either. They are highly cultivated images. So we're constantly doing this comparison. And on top of it, often we are scrolling in a way that we are numbing ourselves. I will be victim to this one myself. Sometimes I'll find when I'm sometimes really just like stressed out, that sometimes I'll catch myself scrolling and it's like, I should be going to bed. Sleep would be better for me, but I'm still just like scrolling on my phone. And it's like a self-soothing thing, but it just makes the problem worse. And I think that's the trouble with the numbing, is that it helps us like avoid the uncomfortable feelings for the moment, but it's a terrible long-term strategy. And uh, I think that numbing might have been a part of what was going on for me for all those years where I was really disconnected from my body and not going to the gym, not taking care of myself. That I had numbed to a lot of what was going on in my body in terms of losing fitness, losing muscle, and how uncomfortable that actually feels in your body. Like now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm like, I will never go back because of how good it feels in my body now. I'm like, I now recognize in hindsight, I felt terrible before, but I just didn't see it, I think, because I was successfully numbing myself. And that's not to say that like getting in shape was really, really hard. I think those first 3 to 6 months in particular is like, you really got to prepare to, you're not only going to not numb yourself, but you're signing up for some real discomfort for those first few months until you get into it. And yet it has been so worthwhile. But I think I share that simply because I think there's lots of ways that people numb themselves. And one of the analogies I liked that she used in the book was this idea that that it's like being a turtle with no shell who's in a bramble bush, and you keep getting stabbed by the thorns in the bramble bush and telling yourself like, oh, I got to get a better shell. If only I had a better shell, I wouldn't feel these brambles stabbing me, without ever stopping to question like, hey, maybe you don't need a better shell. Maybe you just need to get out of the bramble bush so you're not getting stabbed all the time, right? I think sometimes when you want to talk about kind of the ills of modern society, one of those things is that I think that we are tolerating and putting up with a lot of circumstances in our lives that are unsustainable, but because they've become so normalized that we think that that's how people are supposed to live their lives. And so we all just keep on doing it and numbing ourselves to the pain of it, thinking I need to get a better shell. And it's like, actually, no, you need to get out of the bramble bush. I think we all need to start stepping back and really examining what are some of the things that we have normalized for ourselves, or what are the expectations that we're holding for ourselves, and is that really a sustainable thing? Kind of in the same way that you did with the bodybuilding, right? That like you enjoyed that physique very much, but at a certain point you stepped back and went like, is this sustainable? And the things that I have to do to sustain this, is that the lifestyle I want to be living, right? That it was a certain point where you stepped back and chose no, not anymore.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I could just reef on about this. It's like this book was just crazy in a whole bunch of ways, because like honestly just like earth-shattering and in a lot of ways really, really sad.
Yeah.
But then when you get over the hump, infinitely more valuable, because you dig into yourself and you find out all these things that were not you living the life you could have lived, but you can make a change. And I think in my experience as a man, there was a lot of stuff that I see people who don't see men who don't take this journey. And it's like they stay armored and locked into this ideological thinking around how a man should be, and then it's like eventually they wake up. And a lot of times you see well, let's just talk about the most likely group to kill themselves is older men, and I do not think that is a let's say a random statistic. It's because not. In a lot of ways I've in my journey, I think it's very valuable, my career. I see a lot of people going on a journey of self-improvement, and you see that on a bandwidth, like, and then on trainers that I've hired, and you see this commonality with you've just locked in for a total eternity, but eventually you wake up.
Yeah.
Eventually you see what happened, and there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of lifetime of emotions that start to come up. And you'll see some of these older men who nobody's ever seen them cry, and then they're crying at these little things. And it's because you've just blocked yourself for a whole lifespan, and then you wake up.
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, I started to wake up a couple years ago when my mom died. And I'll just touch on that quickly because I think the context matters. Is when my dad died, really locked into this analytical journey of getting muscular and getting smarter. But then I really downregulated all emotions. It was like, destination, nothing else matters. And I had to, because some of the emotions in the context of how my dad died and stuff around ALS, it was unbearable. And I had to do that to survive.
Yeah.
I know this makes me
There's,
emotional, but it's like I had to do it. And then, but I saw a cost to that trait. Like that
yeah.
trait had a cost when my mom died. And the context around my mom died, I was so caught up in this endeavor, I didn't make a lot of time to go home anymore. I didn't see my mom a lot. And there was some context around when she passed away that I didn't go see her because of some context around the last show I was in and capitalizing on an opportunity to grow,
Yeah.
to grow tissue. And I didn't get to go see, like, I didn't know she was going to pass away, but
No.
then that choice really sat in me, and I had a choice in a lot of ways. Like, it came up again. You could just put that in a box and
Yeah.
never look at it. But I chose I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to lose anyone again. And it's like I had to look at that thing. And it took a long time to try to unpack some of those emotions over time. But I started to get in touch with my emotional self. I talk about this journey to anybody who will listen a lot of times because I want people to not live that fate, especially at a time where you couldn't course correct. Is that there's this yin and yang in my life. Is like there's this analytical shutting emotions down, doing what I had to do to survive self, and then this journey of through the emotional side and this in touch with the yin and yang of my brain, the left brain, right brain continuum. And I think for a lot of men, they only exist on that. They try to only exist on that analytical side because that's what they have to do. They have to appear strong. They can't be weak, and they gotta be the provider and fight the battles and survive. But the actuality is that you don't have to be one. The truth is, I could have dealt with all those problems more wholeheartedly and lived a life full of more joy and more connections, and still dealt with those obstacles, leaned into my connections, created communities, and still done the things I needed to do to survive. And I didn't have to do it that way. And I think it played into my experiences as a kid and needing to be alone. And as in that situation, it's like I'm trying to avoid the catastrophe of the past,
Yeah.
and that I'm trying to survive and do what I need to do to survive. And I don't need anybody to do it. But, like, little Nate wouldn't have wanted to be alone. It's
Yeah.
like he had to do that to survive.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not a tool set that now serves me as an adult. Like, that's putting me in the same position over and over again. And that's the definition of insanity. And I'm really grateful to have at least tried to go on that journey at that time point. I'm even more grateful to now have gone on this specific journey to start to live my life a little bit more wholeheartedly and not so pinholed into a life of romanticizing suffering and the lone wolf sort of type
Yeah. I am so grateful to you, Nate, for being willing to talk about that because as we are recording this, it's September, which is Suicide Prevention Month. And as you say, men have awfully high suicide rates. And I see so much of the struggle comes from this cultural expectation to not talk about our emotions, to pretend that they don't exist. And that's just not who humans are. We all
Mm-hmm.
are emotional creatures. And I think the that's for me one of the biggest lies in the myths of vulnerability is that vulnerability is weakness, and it's not. It's weakness when you try and hide it, because if you try and hide it, then other people can, if they discover it, can use it against you to hurt you. But if you own it, talk about it, as you say, with trusted supports, and process it in, because emotions are not unhealthy. Emotion, like if you have been in the briar bush getting stabbed and are saying ouch, like that is a normal human response. There's nothing weak in that. And so talking about it is strength in that case. It's about not pretending that you're not in the situation that you're in, not pretending that the feelings aren't there when they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Later on we'll talk about authenticity and about how, like, to be authentic, you be the heart of that is just not pretending. And I think that that's so important. I want to connect this to, you alluded to it earlier, but I just want to explicitly lay it out for folks because I think it's an important piece here, is about how do we become shame resilient? So like if you are somebody who struggles with their emotions, or if you are somebody who struggles with feelings of shame or shame gremlins that you've named, what do you do with that? So she gives us this 4-step path to being shame resilient, and you named all of it, but I'll just lay it out for folks. Is identify the shame trigger and what signals to you that you're in shame. So identify what is it that triggered it, and it's also like what are the body sensations that let you know, like, oh, I'm in that shame place right now. Then you need to speak the thoughts and feelings out loud. So what are the gremlins? So give voice to those things. What is it that the gremlin or the fear that is behind this feeling of shame? And you need to speak that out loud to somebody who is a trusted support. And by trusted, it means to be somebody who is like earned your trust, earned the right to hear your stories, and that you also can trust that they are going to receive that with empathy. So they are going to empathize with you when you come to them for support. And that this is what she meant by you can't do vulnerability alone. We need to do it in relationship to one another. That makes sense from a brain wiring and neurobiology perspective for humans, that we do this together. And as I learned about that, I think I'd be curious to hear what your experience has been. For me, I think the hardest part about becoming shame resilient isn't about identifying when I'm in shame or naming what the shame gremlin is. It's been about speaking it out loud and finding those trusted supports and knowing, because I think I myself have gone through periods when I was younger where I was just so like, especially when I was like in my early 20s, it was like I was just so wanting to confront all of the shame and just get it out, that I was kind of like sharing it to anybody, and like not everybody was worthy of hearing my stories, and so it wasn't always necessarily received with empathy and support. But so now that I'm older, I still struggle with just like finding the people that I'm willing to be vulnerable with. But how has your experience with it been in terms of becoming shame resilient? Is it about identifying it or speaking it? What parts have been easy or hard for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's in some ways it's like this whole thing plays into some of my superpowers, but also is my kryptonite. Like it's like there's this yin and yang to some of the things I learned into this book. There's a couple, it's like there's so many directions. One thing that I think is interesting is for me, I came from like a toxic soup of shame, and it's hard to describe without getting the context of and it's like my parents have passed away, so it's like I can't ask them for permission to talk about it, but it's just like my mom suffered with a lot of things, a lot of mental health issues, and my dad suffered with a lot of things in mental health issues with abuse, and my dad was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and he had bipolar pop out when he was quite young. And when you see those things pop up in young age, they're quite a bit more serious. And
Yeah.
he had problems pop up when he was an adolescent. And then my mom was like, not a lot of things. My mom was the interesting one because I think my mom was consumed by her experience rather than some genetic disposition to mental health. But they diagnosed her with schizophrenia, but then they backed away from it. And I think my mom just suffered with her experience, but they existed in shame. They were like, there was just so much shame in that household where my dad got sort of discontinued from his family almost. And there was a lot of shame in regards to my mom's weight and her mental health issues, where she used to cut a lot.
Hmm.
And so she was really overweight and had scars just down the top of her arm to her wrists, down her thighs to her calves. And so it sounds extreme, but it's important the context of, I think, how they viewed the world. It's
Hmm.
like they viewed it as suffering, like they were suffering, and they were bad. And so I came out and I think I saw the gap. And I don't exactly know where it happened, but so when I was young, I was like, there was a lot of shame, but there was a chip on my shoulder. And I talk about this a lot of people. I don't exactly know where it came because my brothers didn't have it. I
Hmm.
don't exactly know what happened, but it played out pretty early. I started to get into sports and I started to excel at sports. Um, and what happened is I got this opportunity away from the toxic soup of my family life in physical output. And I think that's what's turned me into this creature. But there's two things: is that my superpower is that I can train anything. Like I could be broken and I would train my fingers and I would feel better about my strong fingers. And it's like the capacity for output in any negative experience in relation to what we can just physically put into the world and express that energy is crazy. You can train through anything and you will feel better about it, and you will always feel better about it. And then one of my superpowers is I started to just like have this real nasty chip on my shoulder and I wanted to piss people off. Like I really wanted to cause a stink. Like I don't know where it came from, but it's like I wanted to be a problem. And so when I got to high school, it really manifested. I got more athletic, I started training, and I started to become the problem. And then it started to attract people, which was interesting. That it's like I became the popular kid. It's like
Okay.
it's like in elementary school, I'm being bullied, and I have the long hair and lice all the time, and there's these embarrassing things happening with humiliation. But by the end of high school, everybody wanted to be my friend, and I had a really really close friend group. Um, and so in the context of this journey, it's like I had this superpower developed because of being able to train through everything. But I kind of saw that like my authentic self people liked. Like, and it's like when I expressed myself, and okay, being a problem isn't good, but I was really outgoing and loud. And it's like people liked this really outgoing, authentic version of myself. But what the byproduct of this was, I kind of just developed some intrinsic confidence along this journey, this ability to train through everything, but then also that people were interested in this authentic version of me. And I think one of them was that very early on, I actually got a very, very close friend group. Is like there was a group of friends that we really, really got close with. And I didn't necessarily know at the time how to identify the freaking shame goblins, but I had a group that I could tell anything, and
Yeah.
it's like our worth wasn't on the table. We were there for each other no matter what.
Awesome.
And I think that early experience of, let's say, building up some marble friends that wouldn't betray me, and then this sort of intrinsic belief in myself and this authentic version of me kind of really played into some shame resilience. But on the other side, I had such a strong it's like such a strong influence that it still lives to this day, where like, oh, I'm hard on myself. And and it just like, if my self-worth is high in the moment on something that I'm confident in,
Yeah.
sometimes it can be productive. It's an area of opportunity.
Okay.
But if it's something that I'm not fully confident in and don't have some area of opportunity, don't see it as an area of opportunity, and I'm the problem, it goes into a nasty, nasty pit really, really fast. And so I think there was a long period of time where I really just blocked all this stuff up. And I think I'm just now, and they say this book is really valuable, is I'm starting to see these things that saved a younger version of me
Yeah.
that I lost in a mid-range version of me, and I'm trying to rediscover in this version. Where I think there was a, like, through my let's say like my 20s, my 20s, there was a lot of shame with a lot of things. That's where bodybuilding kind of caught in. That's where I lost my mom and dad, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of shame that existed. And just now it's like a perfect intersect, where now I've been on the journey, and then now it's like you're looking for a program to build some muscle, and then you find the program and you follow it. It's like this book played out in a lot of ways, I think, a program to start living happier. Like,
Yeah.
honestly. And it's crazy. It's crazy when I think about that, because it's like, you sometimes you just don't realize quite how unhappy you are, or how some of those things are manifesting. And I think shame resilience is so important, because in a lot of ways, shame resilience is like self-worth. And then so it's like, you have to have internal self-worth, but you also get self-worth from connection, and that other people see as valuable or worthy per se. And then you have to find those people that are that do value your self-worth, and you want to surround yourself with those people. But I think shame resilience is big, because we do exist in a shame-based society, and it's almost like people use it to try to destroy you. And the only way to be able to handle that is to develop some shame resilience and some self-worth, to then be able to withstand the obstacles and improve, versus obstacles that destroy you.
Yeah. And I think that's a little bit of the catch-22 of it, is that you need to be willing to be vulnerable in order to build the level of trust in relationships, in order to have people in your social circle who you trust enough to share your shame with, that you can then build that shame resilience, right? Is that there's a prerequisite step of, you've got to take that leap of faith of being vulnerable with people. And that doesn't mean you share your shame gremlins right from the start, but it means investing in the relationships and building up trust over time, so that you have people in your life who you can do this with, because it's so important. I think, like you say, the value in this book is about the shame excavating is really, really important, but it's not the reason this book is valuable. It's because this gives you the process for how do you do that shame excavation in order to get to the good stuff. And so maybe that's where we'll start talking about what are some of the good stuff that this opens up, because I think that's a full 50% of this book is about the good stuff that becomes possible when you are willing to be a little bit vulnerable, have started to name and identify what your own shame gremlins are. And I think, like, we could talk all day about those things, but I do want to move into this next part of the conversation, because I think what it opens up is where the magic, where the real power of vulnerability comes up. And so for this, she refers to them as guideposts, and there's 10 of them. So we're not going to list them all, but in each of these guideposts, there is something that you cultivate in your life, because it is one of the hallmarks of those people who are willing to be vulnerable, those people that she refers to as wholehearted, like Nate was saying, and on this journey to be a wholehearted person, What are the characteristics of those people, and what do they cultivate in their lives? And then what do they intentionally let go of in order to allow this seed to germinate, to be cultivated appropriately? And so there's these pairs of things. I wonder for you, Nate, was there one particular guidepost that jumped out for you as being like, this is one that is already so important in my life that once I read it, it just resonated as, yes, this is why it's so important for me?
Yeah, it's funny because I think in my point right now is it's like I'm doing all the hard stuff, and I
Yeah.
think my viewpoint usually tends to be to look at the hard stuff. So sometimes my perspective, I think, can sometimes be a bit negative, and it's something I'm working on because I think I do have true optimism because I'm trying to stay in a positive state of mind despite my circumstances. And it's not like just putting your smile on your face. Like, how do you actually find that positive and keep a positive frame of mind? I think this was really interesting because a lot of the book sort of drew me to these things that I did and the past and how I could not relive it in the future. And so it's like almost like where I'm at is like it's unpacking all this stuff and what didn't really align with me, and how can I live a future that's more wholeheartedly and full of passion and joy, and not romanticizing darkness and conquering the obstacle and just seeing the obstacle as the thing. I thought this was interesting. It's like I started to think about with these, the like what actually, like, when do I feel happy? Like when are the things in my life that actually give me joy? Like,
Yeah.
not like where am I finding the joy? Where is the joy? And I think it's like there's a couple of them that I think are really big, but they're all kind of important. Um,
100%.
I think
Yes.
I'm just kind of conceptualizing if there was one. I think for me, the cultivating rest and play was so was was almost like a dichotomy shift, but
Yeah.
then something that I'd kind of been coming to,
Yeah.
like this, if people aren't aware, this sort of romanticizing the struggle and this philosophy around that, like, you find happiness in the struggle and the pain. And then, okay, that's really cool if you're dealing with really horrible obstacles. But then you get out of the obstacle and now you're looking for new obstacles and you're not happy in
Yeah.
anything because you're only comfortable in pain. And
Yeah.
like for me, there was this literally time in my life where it was like I felt happier in suffering than when I was outside of suffering. And that was a really interesting thing to sort of look at, is like why I'm not happy in the happy things. So I have to self engineer obstacles. I think where the cultivating rest and play, it's kind of the opposite of that. It's like totally opposite. It's like, how do we play and rest
Yeah.
versus how do we fucking lock in and learn how to rest less? Like,
Yes.
it's like a totally dichotomy shift,
Yeah.
which I really liked because it's letting go of the exhaustion at a status symbol and productivity as a self-worth. And I think that's really interesting because it plays out into a lot of things. It's like that your ability to be productive or ability to put out work is your definition of self-worth. Now, it's like we have to do work to get to the things we like. Let's say we got to start some sort of process. We got to do hard things to get where we want to go. But also there's good things we should focus on. So it's like it's just like, say, we're training and we go through a very, very hard training block, we need to have some rest and downtime. But training isn't the only thing. Like, a lot of people like to romanticize this ideal of this past version of us, this hunter-gatherer thing. And it's like, these hunter-gatherers weren't grinding all day. It was very short bursts of effort and long rests, or
Yeah.
very, very long durations of work to have an eventual big rest. And so humans aren't made for stress. Humans are made for sort of seeking, pushing to get it, acquiring, resting, latent period, seek it again. And that's what wires our species in survival. And then, but so in this between, it's like not everything's the stress. And I think cultivating play for me was really big, because it was like, what is play? And that was a very interesting continuum for me, where I found that play was basically only, for me, really sport. And there was some outdoors stuff. Like, it was actually kind of hard to find play for me. I think that's what's so interesting, because that's, for me, when I felt I was like, when I looked at all these, that was the thing I felt the most happy in. I've done some journaling on what things do I feel truly happy in. And a lot of the times it's sports without an outcome per se. Like, the outcome could be there. It's training and it's getting into the mountains and hiking. And the commonality between all those is there's an outcome, but it's not totally outcome based. I enjoy the process, but it's not to gain some advantage in a lot of ways. Like, I would train if there was no destination. I just love training. And a lot of times it's play for me. And then I love competing. And I like the analogy she brought up of, in the animal kingdom, playing is sort of this point where there's they play, and sometimes there's an obvious victor, and then they'll self-defeat to then get more playing going.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways I developed a deep sense of play with sport, because I was on a lot of losing teams, which is funny to say. Like, I grew up in a small town and I was always the athlete. And so I was on a lot of teams that didn't match me per se and whatever. But so I just kind of got this love of the game, and I just love competing. It doesn't matter if I win. I love to compete. And it's interesting, because then trying to cultivate that and rest more is in juxtaposition to, I would say, the cultural norm of Western society. Do more, rest less, versus find more, play, and rest more. And I think you find more play and rest more, you find more purpose, and you put more effort into those endeavors. I'm a big believer in the kind of seasons of life, and there's times to play and there's times to work, but you have to have that balance. Because it's just like training. If you go all stress and you never recover, you're going to crash. It's going to be bad. And then so cultivating play and rest is kind of like putting yourself in a position to enjoy life more, but still move forward towards your endeavors.
Yeah.
But that's a long-winded thing. What about yourself?
I'm glad you touched on that one, because that cultivating play and rest and letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth is something that I am currently working on. Don't get me wrong. I have always, grew up with a real value of play and rest. But I think that as I have embraced my professional ambitions and wanting to see what I am capable of and wanting to push myself, I have leaned more into this idea of like you start internalizing that message about the value of the grind and the value of the hustle. And, if you really want to succeed, you've got to be like determined, nose to the grindstone. There's that adage about like, I think it might have been Michael Jordan who said it, is like, I might not be the most talented guy on the court, but you will not outwork me. Like, that he was like determined that I will be the best because nobody will outwork me. That's how I become the best. And I really like internalize that as like that. If you want to be the best, that's what you got to do. And I had kind of, in a way, disconnected from that play and rest. And so for me, in my lifestyle, I'm really lucky that I have a friend group who values play and rest. And that's a lot of how we do our social connecting with one another, is through hobbies and activities that would be considered play. But I think just even in my own personal life, I sometimes struggle with turning off. Like, I'm somebody who I've got like a job and a private practice, and I work part-time for another place, and I go to the gym 5 days a week, and and working on a podcast and working on like 3 other projects. Like I've made myself so busy, and it's all with things that I love to do.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's like, my husband is just like, Petrina, you're just busy all the time. Like, can we just put some of this stuff aside and just like hang out? And I find that I struggle with that. One I haven't struggled with, that I have, maybe I struggled with it when I was younger, but I don't anymore. And so I want to share about this, because I think for people who do struggle with it, I think I might have some words of wisdom for it. Is she talks about that people who embrace the power of vulnerability, they cultivate authenticity and they let go of what other people think. And that is a lesson I learned very, very early in my life, because when I was a kid, I got bullied a lot starting at a pretty young age, and was bullied all the way through until like high school. And then just that on top of kind of having a home family situation that wasn't particularly validating of who I was as a human, that I felt a lot of shame at home. I just had a pretty low self-concept. However, I also had 2 parents who, for all their flaws, one of the strengths that both of them had is that they really didn't buy into the idea of conformity, that if you were different, then that wasn't a bad thing. And so they really instilled in our family this family culture of you can't, that it's not that other people's opinions don't matter at all, but that other people's opinions of you don't matter more than your own opinion of yourself. One of the things I have also learned over time is that not all opinions are created equal. Nobody's opinion should matter more than your own. And so it's not that other people's opinions don't matter, but like the opinion of a person who is like a marble jar friend, you have invested a lot of trust and time with this person, and you value them, you value the relationship, you value their opinion, that person's opinion gets to matter more than the opinion of some random stranger online who is like, you're fat, like, and wants to comment on your social media, right? Not all opinions are created equal. And that very much you need to value your own opinion. And so for that reason, one of the ways then that shows up in life in terms of cultivating authenticity is about that who I am is who I am everywhere you meet me. Like who I am online in this podcast is who I am in person when I'm talking to you, is who I am with my friends, is who I am at work. That I don't, and that's not to say that different social settings don't bring out different aspects of me, but I don't feel the need to wear a mask. And that the work of that then is about doing the work of letting go of the idea that other people's opinions matter. And part of how that shows up is making sure that you act in ways that are consistent with your own personal values and standards. Because again, if other people don't approve of something you've said or something you've done, but you can say to yourself, okay, but what I did, is it consistent with what my values are? Then I'm going to be okay with it. And that's not to say we don't make mistakes sometimes and hurt people's feelings and feel guilty and need to make repair. But I think that generally speaking, like if we're acting in ways that are consistent with our values, then we're not going to disappoint ourselves. We're not going to let ourselves down. And that, for me, has been a really important component of being wholehearted myself, is about cultivating that authenticity. And it's not something that came easily. Like I said, it actually came from a place of pain and feeling like I didn't belong and I was never going to fit in. And I believed for a long time that I would just always be alone and I would never find a real friend group and find a place of belonging. I struggled with belonging because I struggled with, seeing my worth.
It's interesting that you say that, because it kind of plays into something that I already touched on that was also, I think, really big for me, is I think that experience of sort of almost like socially meaning nothing is like an important test in a lot of ways, because that's a hard one, because we're adapted socially, like we're social creatures. And so this experience of being put out into the social battlefield and getting destroyed is really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's not that you had to pass that at some point or initially, but it's a real test of character over time, because it's like an ultimate test of self-worth. And then when you're your authentic self, sometimes if you're in the wrong environment, you don't flourish.
Yeah.
But when you're in the right environment, you do.
Yeah.
And the only negative that happens long term, is if you're not your authentic self, is you find yourself living a life that you didn't curate, or you find yourself in someone else's life. And I think for me,
Yeah.
authenticity was really big, because I like the quote she brought up that actually really resonated with me, was that don't puff up, don't back down, stand on your sacred ground. I really liked that, because it was like, you don't need to puff your chest up and make a bunch of noise. That's outside of you, but
Yeah.
you also shouldn't back down on yourself. And it's like, you should
Yeah.
be who you are in and whatever that means for you, per se. And I think for me, early on, it was really puffing up my chest. It's like, I think early on as a kid, I saw the gap, and in a lot of ways that put a chip on my shoulder. And then so when I was younger, I would get into a lot of fights. There was a lot of things going on. I struggled being expelled and stuff, because there was a chip. I don't know exactly where the chip came from. I think for me, it was like, I think seeing shaming of my parents, but then in some way seeing a gap, like they're struggling. Why are they bad? Like, I think I've thought about this a lot, where this chip came from. But so it's like early on, I had to bolster up, and then that really lasted a long time. But in high school, I somewhat found this authentic self. It was
Yeah.
this balance. But long story short, is like, there was this kind of puff up time, but then there was this also time, almost uh started out backing down, went into over buffering, kind of finding the middle, and then on the quest to be the biggest and the smartest, that was like there was a lot of puffing up the chest. Like, it's
Yeah.
like there's I think it's just part of that endeavor, per se, or at least how it worked in mine. It was like, the best. How do we be the best?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of puffing up there, but then now it's almost finding that life middle, which, what is that authentic self? And I think in my experience in leadership was a really interesting test of that, because it's like your subordinates, or your employees, or whatever it is, they will do the things that you stand for, not the things you tell them to do. So it's
Yes.
like, what you are is what they pick up. And I think it probably plays into a lot of different things, that sort of dichotomy. But I think I just tried to be my authentic self, and I went into it with that. And I got a lot of positive feedback in that endeavor. And so, one of the things I was trying to say that I didn't totally allude on is, sometimes you're trying to be your authentic self and you suffer for it. And you have to really try to hold on to that,
Yeah.
because it's not you, it's that environment. But then
Yes.
eventually you start to find a positive environment, and
Yeah.
your authentic stuff flourishes,
Yeah.
because then you get in the right environment. Some people find themselves in the right environment early. Some people, I think, really struggle with finding that right place. But if you're authentic, you will get there eventually, because if you just keep pushing the line and being yourself, and you're constantly, I think, having that self-worth and being able to distinguish those environments, eventually you'll find the right environment, and you're gonna flourish as your authentic self. But when you compromise on yourself, and you I would say puff up or back down, you just sort of aren't gonna find that authentic version of yourself, and you won't find that in right environment, those right connections, whatever it is. So I think authenticity is something that's it's easy to talk about, but it's something that kind of like it's like you got to battle for it. It's like authenticity. It's
Yes.
like it's a hard thing to attain because you have to hold on to it and try to find it, and then you're constantly, I think, course correcting as you develop, but not usually. There's this guiding principle through the whole thing and what some traits are in your authentic self. And I think it's a hard thing. It's not a how-to. It's something that has to be fought for. But when you find it, I think there's a lot of self-worth that you develop because you're just you, and you're gonna, if your energy's so strong, the right environment will kind of find you. But if you don't have a lot of authenticity and you don't have really strong energy, a lot of times the environment pinholes you.
Yeah. And I think knowing my background and knowing yours too, I think for both of us, there was also like, there's this experimentation phase that you go through, especially when you're younger, in terms of like trying on different things to see what fits, to see what's authentic. Like, I think that experimentation is a normal part of the process in terms of figuring out who is your authentic self. What am I good at? Where do I fit in? Where don't I fit in? That kind of thing. And then there's also this piece about, in order to then embrace your authenticity once you discover it, it is about holding on to that as your grounding center rather than listening too much to the opinions of others in identifying that for yourself. There's a really lovely quote I enjoy from Dita Von Teese, the burlesque performer. And so the quote is that you can be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and there's still always going to be somebody who hates peaches. And I love that quote because it's like, yeah, if you're a peach, just embrace being a peach. And if there's somebody who doesn't like peaches, then that's none of my business. So I'm not for them. And that's okay. I think we get into this idea sometimes that we need everybody to like us or for everybody to approve us. And it's like, no, you really don't. You super don't. And especially in this day and age on the internet where people are really quick to be critical and mean and just trust that, like, if you're a peach and somebody hates peaches, that's fine. They're allowed to hate peaches. It's not about you. It's about them. To kind of wrap up our book club conversation of The Power of Vulnerability, I am curious to ask you then, if we were to embrace all of these guideposts to wholehearted living and fully embrace that power of vulnerability, who might be the creature you become, or how has it affected you already?
I think if we fully embrace the power of vulnerability, we'll be able to live a life full of an experience that is truly valuable to us and is not limiting in our capacity for love and connection, and that we can live a fulfilling life while also sort of doing the hard things that we need to do. And that if we embrace the power of vulnerability, we'll be able to live a more fulfilling life without compromising anything. And I think it's affected me quite significantly already, where I think, just like in a lot of ways, you could have a training program and follow it. I think there's a lot of guiding principles in this book that you can sort of immediately take action on, the ones that have most significantly affected you. I think it's already really put me in a point where I'm working towards living a life that is more fulfilling with the aspects of life that are truly meaningful. And it's already started me on I think a new quest.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, really embracing what it means to live wholeheartedly and the creature I become in that is somebody who, I mean, the foundation of it just has a really strong grounding in a fundamental belief in their own self-worth and belonging. And like we talked about with authenticity, I think that's not about feeling that you belong to everyone. It's not being everything to everyone. It is about really belonging to yourself and the people that you see as being the kindred spirits of this world. And And that when we are grounded in that place of belonging, then suddenly we become much more resilient to shame, because part of shame resilience is about having people who you trust and you feel a sense of belonging with, who you can share with, and to receive empathy. And that it opens us up to then all of the possibilities of creativity and connection and play that are the restorative parts of life that enable us to then be able to work really hard at the parts of life that require that grit and tenacity and drive, right? That these things are held in balance, and that if you're just focused on the grit, the tenacity, the drive, the obstacle that you talked about, there's value in that too. But if that's all you're focusing on, just like if all you're doing is training hard and never taking time for recovery and rest, you're going to burn yourself out. And that I was a big fan of the book series Game of Thrones, and one of the phrases that comes from that is that like the night is dark and full of terrors. And I always think like life is dark and full of terrors, but it's not only full of dark and terrors. It is also filled with love and joy and compassion, and that it gives us the creature I become is one that has more resilience because of that perspective, because of being able to see the world in a more balanced way, and move forward from a place that like, yeah, I can push, I can outwork anybody, but sometimes the best work you can do is to restore and connect.
Yeah, and it makes me think of creating a life that's worth fighting for.
Yeah.
Not just scraping through. And I think for me, it's big in these aspects of overcoming my shames, getting more shame resilient, moving away from joy, foreboding, and being more grateful. And I think living to my authentic self and cultivating more play and rest, along with the journey of working hard and doing hard things. I think life inherently becomes a lot more meaningful when we're fighting for something, in antithesis to just fighting because there's nothing left. It's like
Yeah.
the nothing left is coming from a viewpoint of, I think, narrow-sightedness, that when you create a life and you try to cultivate love and connection and experience, you start to create something that's worth fighting for. But when you inherently move through life and try to devoid yourself from connections, I think you inherently only lose yourself,
Yeah.
because you're then sort of fighting for nothing. And most of us have quite a long time to be here.
Yeah.
And I think that just developing a life that's more meaningful gives you purpose to fight for and have joy, in contrast to romanticizing struggle and inherently trying to avoid vulnerability and connection.
Yeah. Agreed. So one last question for you. Who do you think this book would be good for? Who are the people that you think would benefit from giving this book a listen? Who would you recommend it to?
Well, so I actually kind of think this is a little bit like, I think it's going to resonate more with people who are on the journey a little bit more. So I think anybody could benefit from it, but I think it's going to have a really meaningful impact on people that have started this journey to, I think, live a more fulfilling life. And for me, it's like I didn't know what the word was, but I was kind of starting to fight for a life of more wholehearted living over the last couple of years. And now I have a better concept for it. So I think it's going to be valuable for anybody, but really valuable for people who are already on this journey already.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just so much good in this book. I would recommend it to anybody without hesitation. Although I might give a caveat that, like, I have no hesitation about recommending it, but buckle up, Buttercup, because it's a ride.
Yeah.
Having said that, I would recommend it to anybody, even if they're not necessarily prepared to jump in the deep end, because I think you can approach this book at a more surface level. I think she really does hold your hand in terms of baby stepping you through that whole conversation about shame, so that you don't just get drowned in shame as you're listening to it. And I think for anybody who is maybe struggling with negative self-talk, I have one of my former clients who I have a tremendous amount of affection and respect for. She used to refer to her negative self-talk, her inner criticism, as she would call it, the shitty committee, as though it was a committee of people inside of her head that would just tear her down and be really critical. And so we labeled it the shitty committee. And so I think if there's anybody out there who's struggling with their own shitty committee, that the way their own inner voice talks to them is rough and unkind, that this book would be really great for showing you, like, the pathway to start wrestling with the committee and getting it to change its tone. I particularly think, I know that Brene Brown tends to attract a lot of, like, female listeners. I'd love this book for men. I think that men in particular need to see just what power there is in vulnerability, that it is not a weakness to be vulnerable, that it can be a superpower when you know how to harness it. And so I would love to see more men read this book too.
I 100% agree. I think it can be life-saving for the midlife man. It can be enlightening for the later stage. And I think would be a real head start if you had understanding of these concepts early.
Right. Yeah.
And I would just say it's like, I think if you really dig down into this and you take a good learning experience, it's going to cause, I think, some struggle. Like, I think there's hard in this book, but I think that the amount you're paying forward, per se, it will greatly pay you back over the rest of a lifetime in taking these concepts seriously.
I feel like the return on investment in this book is really, really high.
Yeah, I agree.
So, okay. Well, thank you very much, Nate, for your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, I really appreciate your willingness to dive into this topic with me, because it wasn't an easy one.
Yeah, I agree. It was a rough journey, but I think it was exactly what I needed at the right time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I look forward to the next one. Thank you for joining us. This has been The Creatures We Become. Nate, how can the good creatures of this world find you on the internet?
Yes. You guys can find me at Nate Bolding on all platforms. And I'm going to be looking at doing a bit more on those over time. So I'd love to see you there.
Awesome. And you can find me at Petrina Calder, same on all the socials. The Creatures We Become podcast is posted on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and soon to be, we hope, on Spotify. And please feel free to comment. Give us your feedback. If you have a book that you've read that you would love to see Nate and I review, then please give us your recommendations. And we look forward to hearing from you.